That is right, everyone. You heard the BWI Daily music before the Penn State Recruiting podcast from Blue White Illustrated. We are now all one once again as we get going here on a brand new episode in February. I'm Greg Pickel, Ryan Snyder, as always, with us to go through the latest Penn State recruiting news. T. Frank doing all the fancy stuff that Ryan and I can't do very well to make sure you get the best quality episode possible. So, Ryan, we're in a dead period, of course. The February dead period rolls along. But we know spring and summer are both coming. And the reason we know that is because visits are starting to get set to Penn State and to other top schools across the country for the spring and summer official visit and unofficial visit window. So we're going to start with one of those. We have some transfer portal news to get to. A new Penn State offer went out over the weekend in a class of 2024 recruit. Rather, we'll talk about that. But how are you enjoying February? It's a little bit of downtime, but there's still plenty of stuff going on. And Penn State is plenty active, both with underclassmen, class of 2023 guys, and, of course, everyone's favorite topic, the transfer portal.
Yeah. Slow month, but, we're getting there, I guess, to March. I wish we had a little bit more here in the second half of February to talk about. I'd be lying. I mean, if I said we're not searching for news, I guess, at some times like this. But I think the one thing with Penn State, too, is that with their spring break being March 5th to the 13th, it kind of, like if you look at some other schools right now, like they're really lining up a lot of March 5th visits, March 11, 12, 13 kind of visits. And we're not seeing that much with Penn State. And that's, again, because, the school's going to be out of session here that second week in March. And, the coaches go on vacation that week, too. So it's kind of a little bit slower here than I think it's some other schools across the country because of those first 2 weeks in March. But we'll figure it out, man. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some guys probably popping up on campus those first 5 days in March. Who exactly right now, I don't have anyone confirmed. But I'll always take a little bit of downtime, and it's not a bad thing. But it is pretty slow right now. I'd be lying to say if I wasn't.
Quick detour, searching for your opinion on that topic before we get into our rundown of the day. Does that really hurt Penn State, the spring timing window? Does it maybe help them in the sense that some guys will go elsewhere and it'll open up their calendar for later in the month? Do you have any real feel for that at this point?
No, not really. I'd be lying if I said it did. I mean, I think whenever you end a dead period, you want to get guys on campus ASAP, right? I mean, if you look at just the way it opens back up in June, I'm looking back to June 2021, of course.
Right.
Obviously that was a different situation, of course. That's probably not a good thing to compare. But if you look at January, after that bowl game dead period, they always want to get guys on campus ASAP. But I'm sure there will. I mean, if you look at what are the 1st to the 5th, is that a week? I mean, I think it's just a whole. Is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if maybe somebody pops on campus that 3rd and 4th if their spring break lines up with it. I guess the best way to actually describe that to talk about that though would be, how does that spring break line up with other spring breaks? If there's a lot of prominent high schools in the region that also have spring break that same week, that is a bummer. Yes, because a lot of kids will want to get out and visit schools. But that usually, I mean, high school spring breaks usually line up more with Easter. I'm not sure exactly when Easter is this year. I assume it's maybe April or a little later in the year. I don't have it off the top of my head. Yep. But it shouldn't. What is it? Is it 17th? Actually, I'm trying to look it up. I'm not exactly sure, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Okay, very good. Well, let's get into a guy who was not going to come to campus in the beginning of March to begin with, because he's coming a little bit later. He's an official visitor, Treyaun Webb, a running back who Penn State has hosted before, a guy that we have talked about here on the show before. How important is it to not just get his official visit on the books, but for him to be so interested in making that trip, Ryan, that it was the first one he announced of the 5 he's allowed to take?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's always good to get that first one because you're getting the exact weekend you want, right? I mean, that's a huge plus, and I would expect with that being June 11th to the 13th, that weekend is probably going to be maybe Penn State's biggest official visit weekend. Just they got the first pick, and if they're choosing that weekend, it would point to that probably being a weekend where they have a good chunk of really talented players on campus. After he announced his Penn State official visit, he also put it out there that South Carolina is going to get an official visit as well. Looks like the Gamecocks are going to be a serious player here, man. He has 3 visits lined up to South Carolina, I believe, March 15th, and then 4 days later, March 19th. I'd like to ask him about that. I mean, he's in Jacksonville, so is he going to go home? Like, how's that exactly going to work coming back to Columbia 4 days later? But Tennessee has an unofficial visit lined up for April 8th. Florida also March 3rd, and Arkansas March 5th. So we're starting to get a better feel for what his top 5 may be. I believe he announced, maybe a top 11 or so. I think it was the end of January, probably about a month ago. What was it? Baylor, Georgia, UCF, South Carolina, Arkansas, Baylor. I already said Baylor, excuse me. Florida, Iowa, Oregon, Tennessee, and Michigan. So those schools, I assume, will kind of get whittled down to 5. And the fact that Penn State's already has one of those official visits, that bodes well to them, obviously being very much in the mix down the stretch. I mean, when I look at the board right now, and I think we're going to get into this in a second, but I think he's Penn State's most realistic running back target at the moment. And that connection to Cam Miller, who of course played at his school last year, it is a good sign. And he's already been here too. He attended that Michigan game previously. So it's a good sign, but it's February 22nd and we're talking about visits in June. So a lot's going to have to play out over the next 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, we will check in and see what we can learn about that. 2 visits in 4 days stretch for Treyaun Webb to South Carolina.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a new one. I don't know. Maybe he has family there. Maybe there's some kind of other connection. We'll have to wait and see. But certainly you don't see too many of those. When I first read that, I thought maybe it was a typo and he was going to go once in March and once in April. That would be a little bit more logical, but we'll see. Yeah, we will see how that plays out. But let's get into the rest of the running back board. Penn State, Ryan Snyder, obviously working hard to fill that out. You mentioned Webb kind of leads the way there, but wasn't too long ago in one of your Friday mailbags at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you had listed out some of the top players to know at each position for Penn State in this cycle. Webb was, of course, on that list, but where else are they looking at here? And what's your, maybe not early is the right word, but mid-February read on how many guys they want to take after 2 were signed in the last cycle in Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen?
Well, they would sign 2 again, I think, just because, if they get talented guys, they're going to take talented guys. But, I mean, as of late February, and obviously, again, we're projecting something that's way down the road with the early signing period. But I think 1 is probably more realistic, especially when I look on the board. It's a lot of national guys. There isn't much in the region. Of course, I mean, they offered Marquise Williams for Bishop McDevitt. The thing I've consistently been told is, 5'9", 165. It has him a little concerned about his size. He's a good player, and I think he'll play at a high level. But I think Penn State's looking for, somebody just a bit bigger, to put it bluntly. When I look across the country, then of course Richard Young, they want to get in with, from Lehigh Acres. We have him at 5'11", 200-ish. I mean, he's got everybody. Alabama, Ohio State are firmly in the mix there. Mark Fletcher, of course, was on campus previously. He was up for the Michigan game. American Heritage prospect. He's 6'1", 225. I mean, he is a beast, man. That young man. I don't want to ever. Who's the Tennessee running back? I'm drawing a blank right now. Derrick Henry. Yeah, Derrick Henry.
Yes.
Comparing him to him is probably a little bit of a stretch, but I mean, he's a tough guy to bring down watching his film. Dalen Smothers, of course, out of Charlotte too. I mean, he's been on campus before, but when I really look down this board, it screams that more offers are going to have to go out, unless if Webb is the guy. And that's kind of where I come back to, if they have momentum with someone right now, I would think it would be Webb. I mean, Smothers was somebody in the beginning that I thought, like, okay, this makes sense. He's coming up here right when the dead period ended last June. He was on campus, I think, was like in the first week or 2. And, I went and saw him then in Atlanta for it was Rivals camp at the time. And, a lot of good things to say. Like, it felt like he was very interested. But the fact that he hasn't come back yet's interesting to me. And then I've stayed in touch with him too. He doesn't have anything lined up for March, April. I mean, it's still early. I'm sure he can get back here at some point, but right. I just expected him to probably be back by now. So we'll see there. But I mean, when I just look it up and down this board, here we go. Florida, Texas, Georgia, Florida, Kansas, PA for Marquise Williams. And then it goes back to Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Florida. I mean, we're talking all national recruits here. And clearly the region isn't that stacked. Now, fortunately you got the stud in the region in Nick Singleton. So that's good. But time will tell with this one. I just see more offers going out with time.
Ryan, we're moving on to the transfer portal now. Penn State, as you noted in the story you wrote on Monday night about its latest transfer portal offer, is casting a bit of a wide net to try and add to its defensive line room ahead of the 2022 season. And the latest name to know on that front is Jordan Dominic. He's a Georgia Tech defensive lineman who I just talked to him not too long ago before we recorded this. He said some schools are interested in him more as like a hybrid edge guy. Others are, and this Penn State falls into this group, is certainly interested in him as just an edge rusher, defensive lineman, similar to what they did bringing Arnold Ebiketie in before the start of last season. So I guess we'll get into him a little bit. But first, let me ask you this to kind of set the stage. What do you make of what Penn State's done so far in the portal with its offers to guys who fit that mold?
Yeah, I mean, they clearly want to. They I don't know if they want another Arnold Ebiketie. I don't know, that's probably not a fair way to put it, but
right.
They need a pass rusher. It's clear. I think it's clear that they want a linebacker too. And you look at their offers. Of course, you have the Murphy twins, who I think isn't one a defensive end, one a linebacker, I believe, or at least that's how they played it at North Texas. Whether it plays out that way at the next level, I'm not sure. But
you got it.
Those appear to be the two positions of need. I mean, they would still add a Tyler Steen if they can. And, we talked last week about him probably taking an official visit. Probably, I would think it'd be in the second half of March, but we'll see. Right. But yeah, I mean, Dominic, I mean, you talked to him a little bit. You probably have a little more info than me. I mean, from what I've gathered, I mean, he was a pretty solid contributor for Georgia Tech. And then I'm not sure exactly how the junior season played out, but he wasn't starting at the end of his junior season. And, there's talk that a few guys, I think it's Kyle Kennard and Joshua Robinson, kind of surpassed him. I don't know. I don't believe there was an injury, but I can't pretend I followed Georgia Tech all that closely, but he had over 100 tackles in his career. And the one I go back to when I was looking over PFF numbers and things like that was his junior season. And, he ranked 7th out of 38 defensive ends in the ACC that 2020 season. Of course, everything 2020 was strange, but, playing on the field, it's kind of the same thing, right? So you would think that, that's what Penn State's looking at. They're looking at that potential there. He had a 77.8 overall grade, which is pretty good. I mean, I know that wasn't our Ebiketie had a better grade than that this past year, but if he can have that kind of a season over at Penn State, I'm sure they'd be happy with that.
No question. Yeah. So he also had a 70-some-odd-yard scoop and score on a fumble. That's a pretty fun highlight to watch. Once you finish watching the BWI Daily, the Penn State Recruiting show here from Blue White Illustrated, you can go check that out if you're on YouTube. Of course, just type in his name and check out that footage, but it's pretty impressive to watch. Yeah. So when I was talking to him not too long ago here on Tuesday, as we talk in the afternoon on February 22nd, Ryan, I definitely, I asked him, the first question I asked him was to look back on his high school recruiting and then kind of compare, contrast, and just kind of be in awe of what it's like now. And he said the obvious, but it was true. Just funny listening to him say it, that he's a lot of bigger schools that are coming at him now. There are a lot more schools interested in him than at that point in time. I believe he was a 3-star recruit by Rivals back then out of Lakeland, Florida. So he is a Florida guy. He's connected with John Scott Jr. already. Impressed what Penn State has done with defensive linemen, specifically defensive ends, over the last couple of seasons. Ryan Snyder has been in touch with him because obviously he recruits Florida kids so well. And while Dominic is currently still in Atlanta in Georgia Tech, he is from Florida. So I think that's an interesting side note. But there's a lot of schools here. He has not set up his visits yet. Said he wants to get to Penn State. I'm just going to look at my notes quick to make sure I get this right. Arkansas is a school he's interested in visiting. Indiana, UCF, USF are 2 Florida schools, Ryan, that have caught his eye as schools that I'm pretty sure he had a connection with from his high school days. So I don't think you can rule that out as well. But the one thing I was most interested in learning about him was where this goes from a preference standpoint in terms of what's he looking for. Is it academics? Mm-hmm. Is it immediate playing time? Is it NIL? Is it proximity to home or proximity to where he is now or a certain league or whatever? And I mean, he did bring up academics. He wants to continue his schooling in physical therapy. He is going to be a grad transfer, so he's going to pick a place where he can really focus on that at the next stop that he makes, and that's going to play a role. But more than anything else, I think it's about getting on the field in a position that allows him to best showcase his talent. And he said it doesn't matter if he has to move to New York or across the country, the West Coast or whatever, somewhere closer to Atlanta or to Florida. He wants to go to a place that best fits his needs, has a family mindset, and can get him a chance to both win and win as an individual prospect in terms of looking ahead to the NFL. So I think the next step for Penn State is going to be getting him on campus. And the one sense I got from him, Ryan, is that I don't know. This is going to take a little bit of time because, number one, there's no rush. He can't enroll anywhere for a while. But number two, he does want to take visits. But it wouldn't surprise me if this ends up being one of those where he gets to a place and he may have some other stops scheduled for later in March or earlier in April or whatever. But a place just he becomes certain it's the one and maybe wraps things up sooner than expected. So we'll see. But I think if you're a Penn State fan, your hope is going to be that he can get to campus in the early part of March, whether it's that stretch we're talking about, the 1st through the 5th, or right after Penn State spring break. I think that's your goal if you're a Penn State fan. Get him on campus as soon as possible and hope that they can then transition that into a possible commitment down the road. But yeah, he likes Penn State. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's interested in Penn State, but he's fielding offers from all over the place, and more are going to be coming, I believe. So yeah, it certainly will not be a one or two team kind of a deal here. I don't think. Yeah, whatsoever.
Auburn just offered too, this morning. I think it was, 10 a.m. ish. So I'm curious to see if more schools come calling there. But I mean, to me, it's getting that official visit from Tyler Steen and one or two other guys are going to emerge, whether it's Dominic or, we've been struggling trying to get in touch with those Murphy brothers. They offered, was it Mitchell Agude? I apologize.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, he's listed 6'4", 235 out of UCLA. I mean, he's a California native, so they just offered him a couple of days ago, and then just offered Dominic too. So you would think maybe the Rapid, because they can't take all these guys, right? So it's not like high school where you can just throw out offers and you got a year to figure it out. So maybe, I mean, when I see it, I think they offered him. Maybe they didn't get a great impression or whatever, and that's why you offered Dominic next, but. We'll see. I mean, of course, Cam Butler, who they were after from Miami, Ohio, he just committed to Virginia. I know Penn State went out to see Cam, so that was a player they were seriously interested in. And Cam never really opened up about everything, but he's heading to Virginia anyway, so it doesn't matter. But this is definitely a spot they want, no doubt. I think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see a defensive end come in. They just seem too committed to it. And excuse me, I hit my mic there. It's clearly a position in need.
Ochaun Mathis is a guy from TCU who they offered as well. I don't have any new info on him at this point. I don't know if you do. I doubt it because he doesn't talk, so it seems. Yeah, I will say this. Very fortunate to get to talk to Jordan Dominic and have a pretty good conversation with him because, as we've discussed a lot on this show, it doesn't happen very often with portal guys. No. But he was great, and again, I think that. What he can do with the school of his choice and the academic side of it are two things to monitor. But I really do think it's about feeling a connection and a bond at the place he ends up next and the place he's going to feel comfortable at in addition to his family. And if Penn State can make all those pitches sink, they'll have a good chance here. But as noted, as we see it here on Tuesday, the 22nd of February, his offer list grows seemingly by the hour. So, we'll see what else comes into play here over the next days and weeks ahead.
I did see that Iowa State offered him as a recruit too, so I'll be curious to see if there's a.
They are in the mix. Yep, he has heard from them as well. Yep, Iowa State, and then UConn was one he had mentioned. And there were a few others here that I can flip through some other time. You can read the story. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Yeah,
he's going to play Power 5 ball. I mean, he's going to. Yeah, between Arkansas and Iowa State and Penn State and Indiana, Auburn. I mean, the UCF, of course, that would make sense too with him being from Lakeland, but. Yeah, he's going to play big-time ball.
It is the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Recruiting Podcast, now with the BWI Daily edition. Of course, you can find T. Frank, who's producing for us today. We thank him for that. 4 days a week, and he gives you all the latest Penn State news in addition to his film breakdowns and more. You can, of course, find those at youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated. They're also available wherever you get your audio if you're listening to the podcast. Leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think and what you want to hear us talk about moving forward here as February inches closer towards March and the quiet period. Ryan, a couple odds and ends here to close things out with as we come down the stretch on another episode here. Damon Fagan, prospect out of Florida, put Penn State in his top 8 recently. look, I think you guys who gals and whomever who listen to us all the time know top 12s, top 8s, top 6. It doesn't typically mean much. A top 5 that indicates 5 official visits might be a different story. But I mean, when you look at him, and we haven't had a chance to interact with him much, but it's just another example to me, Ryan, of Penn State being able to get in the mix with guys out of the region and being able to get a foothold and get guys interested in them. Now, again, if you don't get him to campus, it doesn't matter, but it's another example of that. And, we'll see if he ends up coming to town at some point in the future.
Yeah, well, he was on campus before. He was at the Michigan game. He came up with Mark Fletcher and one other teammate too. I'm drawing a blank on, but Damari, not Nelson. I forget his last name. Anyway, the thing that stands out with Fagan is, like, we have him listed as a safety right now. He's 6'3", 175, though. I mean, that screams corner to me over safety. Just he's pretty skinny. So, but like what his top 8, let's get into that. I mean, Miami, NC State, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, Florida State, UCF, LSU, great schools. Obviously, that's a great top 8. I'd be really curious to see which one of those 8 are really going all out for him. I've talked to Damon a little bit, but that was also back in November, after he visited. So this would just be another guy they got to get on campus for an official visit. I don't see him coming back up here for an unofficial between now and June. But if they can get him up for an official like they do with so many other South Florida guys, then, possibly they'll be in the mix. But, that cornerback board is kind of similar to the running back board, where, it's a lot of national guys, a lot of out of the region players who, they're off to a good start with, but it's going to take time to really iron that board out. I mean, there really isn't a whole lot in the region. That's why I've been looking. I mean, the good thing is that they have Lamont Payne already committed, of course, and I think it'll probably end up being 2 corners, maybe 3 and 2 safeties. Either way, I just kind of look at defensive back and I say 5 makes kind of the most sense, and they kind of get him on campus and mix and match and figure it out from there. Amari Snowden's the guy who right now I kind of have circled as someone I think Penn State could be a serious player with. He's from, Roseville, Michigan, I believe, 6'3", 190. He's really blowing up now too. He went down to a Miami 7-on-7 and crushed it. So be curious to see how that plays out there. But yeah, the DeMar Brown, that's what it was, from American Heritage, his teammate. So a lot of national guys here again, and there's that they clearly don't see a whole lot in the region. That's kind of what I was looking at Musa Kane for the longest time, maybe being a corner. The one thing I saw with Musa though is he has a 100-meter time, and I think it's like a low 12, which schools always want to see that mid 11 or lower, preferably. So that I think maybe that's going to have some schools asking him to run. Braden Marshall too is another kid from Florida who did make it up here, but we have him at 5'9", 182. So as a corner, Penn State always wants that size. He could be a nickelback possibly, but 5'9", 180, that'll be interesting. They did offer Colton Hood too out of McDonough, Georgia. He was another guy who came up for that ended January. Was it junior day? So
yep.
Another board, man, where I just think a lot's going to have to change. I mean, I look at Antonio Cotman probably as their most realistic of those guys right now, and he's another guy who, is corner really the position? I'm not sure. I would think more so safety. Even some people have talked about him growing into a linebacker, but a lot of things have to play out that position. But you have Lamont Payne on board, so that's good. So you can take your time with it.
Yep, good start there for Penn State. And I'll be interested, too, over the weeks and months ahead as we get out to some camps and things like that, get some updated measurements on guys, things like that, see how maybe that changes the board one way or the other. All right, we got one topic left on this edition of the Blue White Illustrated BWI Penn State Recruiting or BWI Daily, rather, Penn State Recruiting podcast. Ryan, it's 2/2/22. I don't know if you knew that, but our number here is of course, $1 for 1 year of access to Blue White Illustrated and On3. So sign up today. Visit us, bluewhiteillustrated.com, to get info on that. A player who, if you were a member with us at BWI that you wrote about on Monday, Rico Scott, recently picked up a Penn State offer. He was a guy that you had mentioned a few times over the last few months as someone to watch. Penn State finally moves on him over the weekend. What do you make of that? Obviously, a school Penn State's recruited a lot, considering it's right down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So I went to Bishop McDevitt's first game this past season to watch Abdul Carter, of course, who didn't play in that game.
That was a great opening weekend for us. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah.
Were you? What was it? The
You went to
Storms?
see
You went
Abdul
down to see?
Carter, who didn't play, and I went to see the supposed matchup between Anthony Ivy and Mekhi
Oh.
Flowers that was lightning delayed out. So, yes.
Yeah, that's right. But it's funny, man, because I remember watching Rico in that game, and I knew nothing about him at the time. He was just a young sophomore, and I thought he looked good, but I didn't really realize he was going to blow up like he was. And then of course he goes on to have a heck of a season. He was behind Mario Easterly, of course, who went to Old Dominion, and Camille Foster, who he had a handful of the group of five kind of offers, and I'm not exactly sure what Camille's situation is. I don't believe he committed anywhere. I'm not sure if he'll have to go junior college route or whatever. But Rico, man, I mean, he's a pretty explosive player, man. 538 yards on the year, 9 touchdowns, average 21 yards per catch. Pretty, knows how to make big plays, and I think that's really what Penn State has kind of seen here. And a lot of schools across the region now are starting to take notice. I mean, he's a 2024 guy, so I know fans always kind of some roll their eyes at we're talking about sophomores or freshmen, but recruiting is so sped up these days that you really have to get on these guys kind of early. But West Virginia is very much in the mix there. Virginia Tech is also, I believe, offered here recently. Yeah, Virginia Tech actually offered. I think Brent Pry offered like 2 days before Penn State. Then he has a couple, smaller schools, UConn, Bowling Green, Kent State kind of programs. But I just think he's going to be the next guy from Harrisburg that we're talking about a lot. And Harrisburg's an incredibly important area for Penn State. They don't produce guys regularly, but when they do, they're must lands for Franklin and his staff. And for the most part, they've done that over the years. So when you see an offer go out, yes, it's still pretty early. And of course, Marquise Williams got an offer early too. And Penn State's kind of, I don't want to say completely backed off. They're still recruiting him, but they have some other guys higher on the board. So let's see how Rico progresses and moves up the board. But he's a pretty good explosive player, and just from talking around, Penn State seems to be really interested. So he'll be a guy I'm looking to see on campus here in the summer. Wouldn't be surprised if he camped. I know Penn State would love to work him out. He said he was at the whiteout game this past year too, so he has a little bit of a feel for what Penn State and Beaver Stadium have to offer.
A name to watch, Ryan, and we will have many more of those in the future. We've reached the finish line of this edition of the BWI Daily, the recruiting show. T. Frank is back tomorrow and the rest of the week for all your latest Penn State news, notes, and otherwise. You can see him daily. You can visit us wherever you get your audio, and you can join us at $1 for 1 year of access at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We will talk to you next week on the recruiting edition, and T. Frank will talk to you tomorrow on the BWI Daily. Thanks.